Bottom of page 32, Anne Frank. Wednesday, September 2nd, 1942. Dearest Kitty, Mr. and Miss Van Daan had a very terrible fight. I've never seen anything like it. Since Mother and Father wouldn't dream of shouting at each other like that, the argument was based on something so trivial, it didn't seem worth wasting a single word on it. Oh well, to each his own. Of course, it's very difficult for Peter who gets caught in the middle, but no one takes Peter seriously anymore, since he's hypersensitive and lazy. Yesterday, he was beside himself with worry because his tongue was blue instead of pink. This rare phenomenon disappeared as quickly as it came. Today, he's walking around with a thick scarf on because he's got a stiff neck. His Highness has been complaining of lumbago, too. Aches and pains in his heart, kidneys, and lungs are also par for the course. He's an absolute hypochondriac. That's the right word, isn't it? Mother and Miss Van Daan aren't getting along very well. There are enough reasons for the friction. To give you one small example, Miss Van Daan has removed all but 3 of her sheets from our communal linen closet. She's assuming that Mother's can be used for both families. She'll be in for a nasty surprise when she discovers that Mother has followed her lead. Furthermore, Miss Van D is ticked off because we're using her china instead of ours. She's still trying to find out what we've done with our plates. They're a lot closer than she thinks, since they're packed in cardboard boxes in the attic behind a load of Opecta advertising materials. As long as we're in hiding, the plates will remain out of her reach, since I'm always having accidents just as well. Yesterday I broke one of Miss Van D's soup bowls. Oh, she angrily exclaimed, can't you be more careful? That was my last one. Please bear in mind, Kitty, that the 2 ladies speak abominable Dutch. I don't dare comment on the gentlemen. They'd be highly insulted. If you were to hear their bungled attempts, you'd laugh your head off. We're giving up pointing out their errors, since correcting them doesn't help anyway. Whenever I quote Mother and Miss Van Daan, I'll write proper Dutch instead of trying to duplicate their speech. Last week, there was a brief interruption in our monotonous routine. This was provided by Peter in a book about a woman. I should explain that Margot and Peter are allowed to read nearly all the books Mr. Kleiman lends us, but the adults prefer to keep the special book to themselves. This immediately piqued Peter's curiosity. What forbidden fruit did it contain? He snuck off with it when his mother was downstairs talking, and took himself and his booty to the loft. For 2 days all was well. Miss Van Daan knew what he was up to, but kept mum until Mr. Van Daan found out about it. He threw a fit, took the book away, and assumed that would be the end of this business. However, he neglected to take his son's curiosity into account. Peter, not in the least fazed by his father's swift action, began thinking up ways to read the rest of this vastly interesting book. In the meantime, Miss Van D asked Mother for her opinion. Mother didn't think this particular book was suitable for Margot, but she saw no harm in letting her read most other books. You see, Miss Van Daan, Mother said, there's a big difference between Margot and Peter. To begin with, Margot's a girl, and girls are always more mature than boys. Second, she's already read many serious books and doesn't go looking for those which are no longer forbidden. Third, Margot is much more sensible and intellectually advanced as a result of her 4 years at an excellent school. Miss Van Daan agreed with her, but felt it was wrong as a matter of principle to let youngsters read books written for adults. Meanwhile, Peter had thought of a suitable time when no one would be interested in either him or the book. At 7:30 in the evening, when the entire family was listening to the radio in the private office, he took his treasure and stole off to the loft again. He should have been back by 8:30, but he was so engrossed in the book that he forgot the time and was just coming down the stairs when his father entered the room. The scene that followed was not surprising. After a slap, a whack, and a tug of war, the book lay on the table, and Peter was in the loft. This is how matters stood when it was time for the family to eat. Peter stayed upstairs. No one gave him a moment's thought. He'd have to go to bed without his dinner. We continued eating, chatting merrily away, when suddenly we heard a piercing whistle. We laid down our forks and stared at each other, the shock clearly visible on our pale faces. Then we heard Peter's voice through the chimney. I won't come down. Mr. Van Daan leapt up, his napkin falling to the floor, and shouted with the blood rushing to his face, I've had enough. Father, afraid of what might happen, grabbed him by the arm, and the 2 men went to the attic. After much struggling and kicking, Peter wound up in his room with the door shut, and we went on eating. Miss Van Daan wanted to save a piece of bread for her darling son, but Mr. Van D was adamant. If he doesn't apologize in this minute, he'll have to sleep in the loft. We protested that going without dinner was enough punishment. What if Peter were to catch cold? We wouldn't be able to call a doctor. Peter didn't apologize and returned to the loft. Mr. Van Daan decided to leave well enough alone, though He did note the next morning that Peter's bed had been slept in. At 7, Peter went to the attic again, but was persuaded to come downstairs when Father spoke a few friendly words to him. After 3 days of sullen looks and stubborn silence, everything was back to normal. Yours, Anne. Monday, September 21st, 1942. Dearest Kitty, today I'll tell you the general news here in the annex. A lamp has been mounted above my divan bed so that in the future, when I hear the guns going off, I'll be able to pull a cord and switch on the light. I can't use it at the moment because we're keeping our window open a little day and night. The male members of the Van Dan contingent have built a very handy wood-stained food safe with real screens. Up to now, this glorious cupboard has been located in Peter's room. For the interest of fresh air, it's been moved to the attic, where it once stood. There's now a shelf. I advise Peter to put his table underneath the shelf, add a nice rug, and hang his own cupboard where the table now stands. That might make his little cubbyhole more comfy, though I certainly wouldn't like to sleep there. Miss Van Dan is unbearable. I am continually being scolded for my incessant chatter when I'm upstairs. I simply let the words bounce right off me. Madame now has a new trick up her sleeve, trying to get out of washing the pots and pans. If there's a bit of food left at the bottom of the pan, she leaves it to spoil instead of transferring it to the glass dish. Then, in the afternoon, Margot is stuck with cleaning all the pots and pans. Madame exclaims, "Oh, poor Margot, you have so much work to do." Every other week, Miss Kleeman brings me a couple of books written for girls my age. I'm enthusiastic about the Jupe de Houle series. I've enjoyed all of Sissy Van Verkel's books very much. I've read The Zaniest Summer 4 times, and the ludicrous situations still make me laugh. Father and I are currently working on our family tree, and he tells me something about each person as we go along. I've begun my schoolwork. I'm working hard at French, cramming 5 irregular verbs into my head every day, but I've forgotten too much of what I learned in school. Peter has taken up his English with great reluctance. A few school books have just arrived, and I brought a large supply of notebooks, pencils, erasers, and labels from home. Pim, that's our pet name for Father, wants me to help him with his Dutch lessons. I'm perfectly willing to tutor him in exchange for his assistance with French and other subjects, but he makes the most unbelievable mistakes. I sometimes listen to the Dutch broadcast from London. Prince Bernard recently announced that Princess Julian is expecting a baby in January, which I think is wonderful. No one here understands why I take such an interest in the royal family. A few nights ago, I was the topic of discussion, and we all decided I was an ignoramus. As a result, I threw myself into my schoolwork the next day, since I have little desire to still be a freshman when I'm 14 or 15. The fact that I'm hardly allowed to read anything was also discussed. At the moment, Mother's reading The House of Tavelnick, and of course I'm not allowed to read it, though Margot is. First, I have to be more intellectually developed, like my genius of a sister. Then we discuss my ignorance of philosophy, psychology, and physiology. I immediately looked up these big words in the dictionary. It's true. I don't know anything about these subjects, but maybe I'll be smarter next year. I've come to the shocking conclusion that I have only 1 long-sleeve dress and 3 cardigans to wear in the winter. Father's given me permission to knit a white wool sweater. The yarn isn't very pretty, but it'll be warm, and that's what counts. Some of our clothing was left with friends, but unfortunately we won't be able to get to it until after the war, provided it's still there, of course. I just finished writing something about Miss Van Dan when she walked into the room. Thump! I slammed the book shut. Hey, Anne. Can't I even have a peek? No, Miss Van Dan. Just the last page, then? No, not even the last page, Miss Van Dan. Of course I nearly died, since that particular page contained a rather unflattering description of her. There's something happening every day, but I'm too tired and lazy to write it all down. Yours, Anne. Friday, September 25th, 1942. Dearest Kitty, Father has a friend, a man in his mid-70s named Mr. Dryher, who's sick, poor, and deaf as a post. At his side, like a useless appendage, is his wife, 27 years younger and equally poor, whose arms and legs are loaded with real and fake bracelets and rings left over from more prosperous days. This Mr. Dryher has already been a great nuisance to Father, and I have always admired the saintly patience with which he handled this pathetic old man on the phone. When we were still living at home, Mother used to advise him to put a gramophone in front of the receiver, one that would repeat everything 3 times. Yes, Mr. Dryher, and no, Mr. Dryher, since the old man never understood a word of Father's lengthy replies anyway. Today, Mr. Dyer phoned the office and asked Mr. Cougar to come and see him. Mr. Cougar wasn't in the mood and said he would send Meep, but Meep canceled the appointment. Miss Dyer called the office 3 times, but since Meep was reportedly out the entire afternoon, she had to imitate Bep's voice. Downstairs in the office, as well as upstairs in the annex, there was a great hilarity. Now, each time the phone rings, Bep says, "That's Miss Dyer," and Meep had to laugh so that the people on the other end of the line are greeted with an impolite giggle. Can't you just picture it? This has got to be the greatest office in the whole wide world. The bosses and the office girls have such fun together. Some evenings I go to the Van Dans for a little chat. We eat molasses cookies that were stored in a closet that was moth-proofed, and have a good time. Recently, the conversation was about Peter. I said that he often pats me on the cheek, which I don't like. They asked me in a typically grown-up way whether I could ever learn to love Peter like a brother, since he loves me like a sister. Oh, no, I said. But what I was thinking was a hug. Just imagine. I added that Peter's a bit stiff, perhaps because he's shy. Boys who aren't used to being around girls are like that. I must say that the Annex Committee, the men's section, is very creative. Listen to the scheme they've come up with to get a message to Miss Brooks, an Opeta company sales representative, a friend who's serendipitously hidden some of our things for us. They're going to type a letter to a store owner in southern Zealand who is indirectly one of Opeta's customers and ask him to fill out a form and send it back in the enclosed self-addressed envelope. Father will write the address on the envelope himself. Once the letter is returned from Zealand, the form can be removed and a handwritten message confirming that Father is alive can be inserted in the envelope. This way, Mr. Bucks can read the letter without suspecting a ruse. They chose the province of Zealand because it's close to Belgium. A letter can easily be smuggled across the border, and because no one is allowed to travel there without a special permit, an ordinary salesman like Mr. Bucks would never be granted a permit. Yesterday, Father put on another act. Groggy with sleep, he stumbled off to bed. His feet were cold, so I lent him my bed socks. 5 minutes later, he flung them to the floor. Then he pulled the blankets over his head because the light bothered him. The lamp was switched off, and he gingerly poked his head out from under the covers. It was all very amusing. We started talking about the fact that Peter said Margot is a buttonski. Suddenly, Daddy's voice was heard from the depths. "Sits on her butt, you mean?" Mooshy the cat is becoming nicer to me as time goes by, but I'm still somewhat afraid of her. Yours, Ian. Sunday, September 27, 1942. Dearest Kitty, Mother and I had a so-called discussion today, but the annoying part is that I burst into tears. I can't help it. Daddy is always nice to me, and he also understands me much better. At moments like these, I can't stand Mother. It's obvious that I'm a stranger to her. She doesn't even know what I think about the most ordinary things. We were talking about maids and the fact that you're supposed to refer to them as domestic help these days. She claimed that when the war's over, that's what they'll want to be called. I didn't quite see it that way. Then she added that I talk about later. So often that I act as if I were such a lady, even though I'm not. But I don't think building sandcastles in the air is such a terrible thing to do as long as you don't take it too seriously. At any rate, Daddy usually comes to my defense. Without him, I wouldn't be able to stick it out here. I don't get along with Margot very well either, even though our family never has the same kind of outbursts they have upstairs. I find it far from pleasant. Margot's and Mother's personalities are so alien to me. I understand my girlfriends better than my own mother. Isn't that a shame? For the umpteenth time, Miss Van Daan is sulking. She's very moody and has been removing more and more of her belongings and locking them up. It's too bad Mother doesn't repay every Van Daan disappearing act with a Frank disappearing act. Some people, like the Van Daans, seem to take special delight not only in raising their own children, but in helping others raise theirs. Margot doesn't need it, since she's naturally good, kind, and clever, perfection itself, but I seem to have enough mischief for the two of us. More than once the air has been filled with the Van Daan's admonitions and my saucy replies. Father and Mother always defend me fiercely. Without them, I wouldn't be able to jump back into the fray with my usual composure. They keep telling me I should talk less, mind my own business, and be more modest, but I seem doomed to failure. If Father weren't so patient, I'd have long ago given up hope of ever meeting my parents' quite moderate expectations. If I take a small helping of a vegetable I loathe and eat potatoes instead, the Van Daans Especially Miss Van Dan. Can't get over how spoiled I am. Come on, Anne, eat some more vegetables, she says. No, thank you, ma'am, I reply. The potatoes are more than enough. Vegetables are good for you. Your mother says so, too. Have some more, she insists until Father intervenes and upholds my right to refuse a dish I don't like. Then Miss Van D really flies off the handle. You should have been at our house, where children were brought up the way they should be. I don't call this a proper upbringing. Anne is terribly spoiled. I'd never allow that. If Anne were my daughter... This is always how her tirades begin and end. If Anne were my daughter, thank goodness I'm not. But to get back to the subject of raising children, yesterday a silence fell after Miss Van D finished her little speech. Father then replied, I think Anne is very well brought up. At least she's learned not to respond to your interminable sermons. As far as the vegetables are concerned, all I have to say is, look who's calling the kettle black. Miss Van D was soundly defeated. The pot calling the kettle black refers, of course, to Madame herself, since she can't tolerate beans or any kind of cabbage in the evening because they give her gas. But I could say the same. What a dope, don't you think? In any case, let's hope she stops talking about me. It's so funny to see how quickly Miss Van Dan flushes. I don't, and it secretly annoys her to no end. Yours, Anne.